Hi, this is Reed Jacobs with Faith and Hope Hospice, bringing you another COVID conversation. Today we're discussing how to talk about death, end-of-life choices, advanced directives, and the importance of these in the time of COVID. I'm happy to have with us Lori LoCicero. Welcome, Lori. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
Certainly, yes. I am a writer and also the co-creator of the Death Deck. I'm also a mother of two teenagers, and I am a widow. And I mention that because that's really my experience watching and experiencing my husband go through hospice is what was the inspiration to create the card game, the Death Deck,
Mm.
to really help people to have these conversations before they have to have the conversations. And I found myself in the position of having to have just a very short but very excruciating conversation with my husband about things that we really should have had in a conversation before.
Mm.
So that's where the game came in. I'm hoping, and my mission now in life is to help people to have these important conversations before they are in the position of having to have them.
Yeah, I know these conversations are important, but it's a difficult topic to talk about. It's uncomfortable for a lot of people, but it's even more uncomfortable when you're in the moment and needing to have those tough conversations with immediate consequences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay. So, yeah, I definitely appreciate. Thank you for sharing about your experience, and I really appreciate all the work you do.
Thank you.
It looks like we kind of already started talking about it, but what's the importance of talking about death?
Yeah, it's such a heavy question.
Mm. Yeah.
And there's a lot of answers, but really I think is, it's going to happen, and hopefully not soon. But, you know, having these conversations and being comfortable even with saying the word death, I think helps us to better prepare for the end. And I think that's the one thing that, just took me by surprise is not being prepared because never really having a conversation about death. And I feel like the more we can talk about it, the more the fear sort of comes away from it. I was one of those people that it was just so fearful, didn't want to talk about it. And once I went through the experience of it, and the more I talk about it, the more healing it is, the more helpful it is, and the more prepared I am. So it is, like you said, it's a hard conversation to start, but it's an important one, and there's just so much value in talking about it. I think even to just be able to live life more fully, it's takes away that fear, and it takes away, a lot of the chaos when it does come to the end.
Hmm. Yeah, one thing I've learned about in working in hospice care is that learning about talking about death and thinking about it helps you live a more fulfilled life. Um, and that one of the things that a lot of people I've worked with um, as they're near death and reflecting on their life, um, a lot of a lot of people have seen, oh, I wish I had have done this with my life. I didn't think, I thought I would always get to it, or it was something I always wanted to do. Um, but I figured when I was older, I'd do it. But then we don't always know when our time is. And sometimes it's when we're in our 30s or 50s or 80s. It's hard to know. Uh, so being aware of our own death and life can help us live a more fulfilled life.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because that's so interesting with, the profound things that I think people in their, their last months or their last weeks, and the realizations that they have. And it's something that, I feel like all of us could have more of, by realizing, okay, I've got wishful thinking, I've got 30 more years or 40 more years. You just never know. But to sort of embrace the fact that that our years are limited, and what do we want to do. And I think it really helps us focus, again, talking about death helps us focus on what we want to do now, what we want to do today, what we want to do this next year, in our lives. And it really gives us the ultimate deadline, really. As
Yeah.
corny as that sounds, but it is. I mean, and there's a fabulous website that I just love called The Bucket.
Mm.
And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but if you go on their site, you can put in your current age, your gender, and it will give you just sort of the general lifespan years of what you may have left. So your bucket age is the years that you have left. And when you look at that number, you think, man, okay, so I've got this many years. What do I want to do? And it really, solidifies, those goals and those things that you want to get accomplished, because, you no longer are just sort of, I don't know how long I have, and not paying attention to it, not sort of, acknowledging that mortality.
Hmm.
So it's a great tool.
It sounds like a good resource. I will put a link down in the blog where we post this video
Oh,
so that
great.
people can find that. And so talking about how difficult these conversations are, yet how important, um, how do you build up the courage to ask people to start these conversations?
Yeah. So I think now with COVID is such an interesting time, because I feel like, you know, death is on our minds. I mean, it's something that could happen to anyone at any time. And it's now even more sort of in our faces and in our minds of, of a possibility. So now is sort of that it's makes it a little scarier, because it could be a reality, but it also, I think, opens up to where it could be an easier conversation, like the what ifs. Let's just be prepared. Like, you live in California as well, correct?
Yeah,
So we've got our earthquake preparedness.
yeah,
It could happen at any time, but we're not always all prepared. But now, with the way the world is right now, it's like, well, now is the best time to be prepared. And yeah, hopefully the chances for you personally are very slim, but it is something that is a possibility. So why not sit down now and get this paperwork done that you've been putting off, um, to get it, on paper, especially those, directives, assigning someone to be your healthcare proxy. Because what if something happens? You don't want to be scrambling at the last minute to try to, figure this stuff out. So now that we're at home and we have a lot of time to think, um, you know, it's a really good time to do this. Now, getting people to do it, that's what I think you started the question
yeah.
off. Um, we feel like we've created this game that is an incredible icebreaker to start the conversations. And what we found is, if we can get people to just start talking, it really manifests into much larger and much deeper conversations. So that's exactly what we've tried to do, is make it a game,
Hmm.
make it a little fun, add a little humor, give it some multiple choice elements that then you're not just put on the spot. Because I think a lot of times, and a lot of the card games that we researched before we created the game, were very much, how do you want your funeral to be? And they're very great, pointed questions. But those, I think, if you haven't had any conversations about death, completely like throw up the guards. So, we're trying to just, this is a game, and what would you answer, what would I answer, and it's a little gentler with a little comedy to then just start to get talking. And I think what has happened in probably almost all the games that I've played with people is they start talking, guards may be up a little bit at first, and then it's interaction with other people, and oh, and I didn't think that, and I didn't know you thought that, and it just starts to get naturally a little bit deeper. And answers and things come out. So we're really trying to, position ourselves as that icebreaker to help people to then, be the spark to like, you know what, I don't have an advance directive. I probably should do that and get them to do that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and your game, the Death Deck, um, makes the topic so much more approachable. It's easier to, like you were saying, answer some of these multiple choice and the game aspect of it. In a personal experience, working in hospice for nearly 15 years, I talk about death and dying every day. I did my advanced directive years ago. When I brought the Death Deck to my parents and wanted to start it, it's like, how in the world do I ask them to play what? It's so much different when it's your own family and it's your own. How do you recommend people say, hey, you want to play the Death Deck?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a way to do it is to, start the conversation of, you know, where we're at in these times. Listen, there's a lot of death going on right now. It's a topic that we haven't really talked about. I don't want to sit down and have an extremely heavy conversation with you right now, but I found this incredible game and this incredible tool that just has these kind of fun, quirky questions. So would you mind, playing a little bit? I'll ask you a question and I'll answer it as well. It's, some multiple choice answers, and I'd love to just hear, what you think. So, in that point, you'd probably want to stack the deck, as we call it, and pull out, a card that's, maybe not the heaviest of cards, that we've kind of mixed them to, talk about, the logistics of death and dying and different kinds of burial options and whatnot. But then there's also some that are just talk about, your thoughts about the afterlife, or what do you think about a medium, or, even things about tattoos. So, you pull one that's a little softer, and then you kind of segue a little deeper into, do you have, do you have a plan? Do you have documents? Yes, I do, and everyone knows where to find them, or no, I have no idea where to even begin. So, starting that way with just sort of easing into questions. And that's, what we try to do with the deck as well, is that, it's really not just talking about your death or a loved one's death, but talking about, death and dying and afterlife and beliefs in general is quite a fascinating conversation. And, that's one we don't generally have that much in society. So, we want to encourage that as well, because I love to hear different people's viewpoints. I love to hear people if they've also had signs from beyond, or, what they feel like, really, really happens, either during the dying process or in the afterlife. I mean, I think it's fascinating. So, to take that pressure off of, I'm going to sit you down and ask you 10 questions about how you feel about dying
Yeah.
is not what we're doing. We're trying to do it a little bit softer and a little bit more with comedy and
Yeah.
with those layers.
Yeah. Yeah. Comedy and levity it's part of what makes life good, and it makes difficult conversations easier. And in hospice, we focus so much on quality of life. And for me, joy and laughter is so much quality of life. If you can bring that even to difficult topics, that's vital.
Yeah. And I love that, there's a question too about, what's your beliefs of hospice? And I love hearing the answers to that conversation, because, I was one of those people that, that was a word that I didn't want to hear in the doctor's office. My husband had cancer, and anytime that word came up, because I really just didn't understand what it was. Palliative care, didn't know what that was. So, just by not having those conversations, back to your original question, why should we talk about death? Because we want people to know these things. We want people to know, I wish I would have known. I wish I would have been more open to talking about, those hospice and palliative care, because at the very end, when hospice did come in, I kicked myself. I like, why did I not bring this in earlier? This would have been so helpful to to me, to him, to the dying process, like to have that incredible support. So I thank you so much for the work that you do, because it's incredible. And I wish I would have had a conversation with someone years back about what hospice really was, because it would have been so helpful. So
Yeah. Earlier you were mentioning something about doing the documents. So like medical power of attorney, saying who you want to be your medical decision maker, living will. Um, I'd like to get your insight on, if we are having these conversations, if we do the death deck and we talk about it, um, should we still do the documents?
definitely, yeah. And there's different ways to do it. I mean, I recently redid all of my documents because some things had changed, and it's something I felt like I needed to go back to and make sure that my wishes were reflective of how I feel now, and they have changed. So I was able to go in. I also was able to I had actually changed. I had two people that were my healthcare proxy people, and I flip-flopped them because one of them really knows me so much better now, and I feel like that would be the best person to help me. So that you can go that route with hiring someone, the estate planner or whatnot, to get all those documents and really go through thoroughly, which I did and was wonderful. You can also go online and download an advance directive for depending upon the state that you live in, and I believe you can still just have two witnesses fill
Mhm.
it out, so you don't have to get anybody legal involved. But by having that document, now you've got this piece of paper that will, if something were to happen, that people would know what you wanted to do and what your wishes were, and they wouldn't all be just standing around going, I don't know what to do. And so it takes away that confusion, and it's such a gift to your family or whoever is doing that, because then they're not second guessing themselves. I feel like there's a lot of second guessing, like someone so well, but in
Yeah.
that moment you're like, I don't know. And if you've got siblings involved with a parent, and you just you want to get that on paper. So that's, I think, the first important step, is just to get that down on paper and find that person who's going to best be able to support those wishes and make those decisions on your behalf. Now, the other thing is having a conversation or conversations with that person and your family, so that it's fresh, so that people know, so that maybe, even if maybe you have an advance directive that you made 10 years ago, but if it's just sitting in a file and nobody really knows, and then they're dusting it off, in the time of a crisis, it's like, well, no, I don't think they would believe that now, or I don't, is that really, is it still legal? So, to be able to let people know and have those conversations. And then even the conversations can lead to things beyond what's on that document. That was one thing that struck me too, is that, we had advance directives. My husband and I had them, and I was his healthcare proxy. And yet, even though when we got to the end, there were so many other things that could have been discussed in conversations that weren't on that page, things
Oh,
about those final weeks when he was in hospice, of the environment. We really hadn't talked until a couple of months before about what his final wishes were. And so we had a very short, painful conversation, but I at least was able to get some of that information out, and then everything else I really had to sort of fill in the blanks. So having the documents, great. Having those conversations with loved ones, even better.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I like how you mentioned that you can update these documents. It's an ongoing process. Your choices may change over time, and it's good to remember that these documents are written on paper, and they can be ripped up and shredded, and a new one can be made. So yeah, it's definitely not a one and done, and it's your decisions change and evolve over time, and so can your documents. And also talking about um, finding the documents and dusting them off, it's important to know where they are and easy to access, because in an emergency, it's great that you've done the the documents, but if they're in a safety deposit box at a bank, that's not going to help so much. So having them easily accessible, I recommend people take a scan of them and keep a copy in the cloud, or some people even put it on their phone. So if you're out and about, you can still get it. Even if you don't have the piece of paper, you can have that in front of you.
Yeah, and I recently, when I updated them, sent a copy to the two people who, would be providing that care for me, and or making the decisions for me. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's so interesting, and it makes me laugh in not a good way that I wouldn't had a very minor surgery last year, and of course they always asked, do you have an advanced directive? And it's like, yeah, here you go, and plopped it down, and the look on the admitting nurse's face was like shock, like, oh, you actually do have one, we always ask that. I mean, it's like, wait, am I the only person bringing this in? I think so few people do that. And and I'm not incredibly young, but I think that just the look on her face of just anyone under 70 that did that, it was like shock. And I'm like, well, that's not right. I mean, everybody walking in for any surgery should have that document, and they scan it and put it in their file, so if I ever go back to that hospital, then they have it. I mean, it just surprises me that that people they don't have that. And I mean, I guess they can't really enforce it, but it just seems something that we definitely need to get more people to do, because I'm sure you see it all the time, of just the chaos and the family dynamics of just so much additional pain and frustration and fighting that doesn't need to be, if people just had these conversations earlier. What does grandma want? Well, we should talk about that years before, not in minutes before.
Right.
We're making
Yeah.
these major life decisions. So so important, so important to let people know to get these documents done and have these conversations.
Well, I think that's a good cap on everything we've been talking about. Are there any other things that we may have missed, or anything else you'd like to share?
No, I think we covered a lot.
Okay, yeah,
And just keeping that importance in mind to just start that conversation. It's going to be painful at first, but it's going to get so much easier, and you're going to be so grateful that you did.
yeah, yeah. It's intimidating to think about the conversation and initially starting it, but it does get easier. And especially with something like the death tech, it helps that even more and makes it a fun process. So I encourage people to use it. I'll put a link in our blog as well about where to find the death tech. And I believe what's your website?
Thedeathtech.com.
That's easy enough.
Easy to remember.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Lori, I certainly appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today, and appreciate your insight and the, like I said, and the work you do. It's great.
Thank you, Reed.